So as you work on successfully resigning from PPO plans, it's important to make sure that your fees are indexed where they should be today, where they should be. And there's some ways to do that. How do you know, we chose the title today, what's the best way to determine an appropriate fee schedule? And I remember I looked at this with a client of mine recently, and I felt like his fees had somehow become out of balance. And I did an analysis of his fees, and I determined, Darren, that among the services he provided, he was all over the map. He had fees that were at the 20th percentile, and he had other fees on the other end of the spectrum that were at the 130th percentile. He didn't want to be in either one of those universes, but somehow the fees had gotten that way. And the reason that happened, Aaron, is that when he raised his fees, he would kind of look at his fee schedule and he'd selectively raise some and not raise others. And imagine that being done now over a long period of time, in this case, over 20 years. And what resulted was some of his fees in the 20th percentile range and others in the 130th percentile range. They needed to be reindexed. So there are ways for you to understand what fees are, in your geography. There's a lot of different concepts around, how do you set your fees? And I think one of the useful ways to do it is to get accurate information about what fees are in your zip code. And I don't suggest you get that by simply talking to your colleagues in your neighbors in the area. First of all, it's a very sensitive topic. Hey, what are your fees? Now, you may have colleagues, you may have close friends that you can do that with. But as far as going to the dental society and having that conversation with your local dentist, I don't suggest that that's a very productive way to do that. And on top of that, it may not be very scientific. So one of the ways that you could determine what an appropriate fee schedule would be to access information by zip code. For example, if you have an accounting firm that you work with, that you're a client of an accounting firm that works with a lot of dental practices, it might be useful to talk to your accountant about them sharing that information with you anonymously. Of course, they have to be shared anonymously, so they're not committing any any violation of confidence and confidentiality. But maybe they could share that with you by zip code. If you are a client of an accounting firm that is a member of the ADCPA, the Academy of Dental CPAs, that would be a very useful place to start. The ADCPA are good friends of the Less Insurance Dependence podcast and the Thriving Dentist Show podcast. These are 24 independent accounting firms. They operate independently. They're independently owned. However, they've grouped together, they banded together in the form of an association. The common denominator among these 24 firms are all over the country. They work exclusively with dentists, and they typically average between 400 and 500 dental clients, which makes it very useful because they understand the nuances of accounting and finance as relates to dental practices. Collectively, they represent over 12,000 dental practices in the United States. Go to adcpa.org. It's a nonprofit, adcpa.org, and learn more. And I would consider becoming a client and asking them if they could provide you with fee information for your area, for your zip code and for your area. Some of the things that are published, say, through journals like Dental Economics and other, print forms, I don't think are necessarily the best source. Because they often come from surveys that they do, as opposed to, truly scientific sourcing of that information. So I think, leaning on an accounting expert that has access to data can allow you where to set your fees. As far as a percentile goes, once you see what the fees are, then you have to answer the question, what percentile would you like your fees to be? Now, you're going to have to answer that yourself. I know for my clients, when I've assessed, their adoption of technology, for example, here's some things that might go into the equation. I mean, Naren, if I was to ask you, well, how much does a restaurant charge for a meal in your area? Is there any way you can answer that question for me?
No, I'll say it depends on the restaurant.
It depends on the restaurant. Well, what do you mean, Aaron? And you might say, well, it
I'll
depends
say the
on.
ingredients, the location, the ambience, the chef. I mean, if they are like having somebody, who's like a world famous chef, I'm sure I'm going to pay a
Might be
premium
more
for that,
expensive,
right? Yeah.
right? Well, I think in the same way that can apply to dentistry. Uh,
Yes.
how's your facility? Is it state of the art? How's your adoption of technology? Are you up to 2024 standards in terms of adoption of technology? How's your team? Um,
Even
how,
like your marketing and brand, right? If they think you are famous and you're really good at something, you can charge a premium.
yeah, yeah.
Mhm.
What's your branding? How's your CE? Are you a dentist that takes the minimum number of CEs to take your license, keep your license every year? First of all, I doubt that's anybody that listens to Less Insurance Dependence podcast because you just aren't in that camp. You're of the uh, uh, you're of the breed of dentist that takes a massive amount of CE and you listen to podcasts and you genuinely work on your practice. So you're worth more. But when it comes to that percentile, I happen to believe that either extreme isn't necessarily the right place to be. You don't want to be the lowest price in town. Now, being the lowest price in town, can you imagine the billboard, Naren? It said, cheapest dentistry in town and having your URL.
Yes.
Now
And I
that
mean,
might
I
that might
cannot imagine it
appeal.
because, that could really, actually turn off the people who really value quality and,
Right, right.
who want, because I mean, this is their health and their smile. So they don't want the cheapest, lowest cost dentist to take care of them. They want the best. Kerry, one thing I think we should address at some point is the elephant in the room, right? Which is this makes sense if you are not 85-90% dependent on PPO plans, right? So the question is, how do you reduce your dependence on PPO plans? Like, what can you do proactively to start attracting patients who are not on PPO plans?
Well,
Because
first of all, remember that that's not entirely true, Naren, because when we do this in our coaching,
yeah,
the office keeps a majority of their PPO patients. They keep them
right,
in the practice, but now those patients are paying usual and customary fees.
right,
But you're right about the fact that the practice needs to be also have a way to attract people that don't have insurance, and
right,
there's very useful ways to do that. I happen to think the most useful way to do that is to work with your firm, Equa, and master organic search engine optimization. So when someone in your community is looking for a dentist, you show up on page one of an organic search where you're not paying Google for that. You've earned it by your ranking.
right.
I think that's the most useful way to do that. But let me come back to the percentile. I don't think it makes sense to be the cheapest dentist in town. I think that could actually backfire in a very horrible way, to attract the wrong kind of patient. And then I don't necessarily think it's useful to be the most expensive practice in town either. That could be a badge of honor, but I'm not sure that that resonates well with consumers. But generally, in my client base, and typically these are doctors that have a nice up to date office, have an up to date adoption of technology, have a well trained team, take a massive amount of CE. Um, I generally recommend somewhere in the 80th percentile would make sense. Somewhere in that range, 80th percentile would be a good place to live with your fee schedule. But I want to emphasize you have to determine that yourself. But here's some ideas. And remember that if you've been that dentist that hasn't raised your fees for a long time because you say it's futile anyway, because I can't raise my fees for Delta, they set them for me, then you may have gotten out of the discipline of doing this. And that's why we wanted to do this episode to get you thinking about it. Some action you might want to take. I'll suggest three things coming out of this, three actions you may consider taking out of this episode. One would be to go to adcpa.org and connect with one of the 24 member accounting firms that could provide very useful information for you and also world-class accounting services. Secondly, if you haven't done it already, schedule a marketing strategy meeting with Equa. Go to equa.com /MSM, marketing strategy meeting, where you could learn how you can attract people that don't have dental insurance to your practice. And third, consider working together with Thriving Dentist as a coaching client, and we'll help guide you through this. And again, you can go to lessinsurancependence.com /CSM to take action on that.